They trade with each other every single day, depend on each other's money and technology. But there's always some sort of hiding. So, why does China and the West still not trust each other? This is the story of how China and the West ended up with such a bad relationship. In order to understand this, we have to go back almost 200 years. In the early 1800s, China wasn't weak. It was rich and advanced. It had silk, porcelain, art, and tea that Europe desperately wanted. British families built entire routines around Chinese tea. European elites paid huge sums for Chinese goods. But China didn't need much from Britain. Trade had to be paid in silver. British silver reserves began shrinking fast. So, Britain found another product to sell: opium, grown in British-controlled India and smuggled into China. The drug spread quickly. Addiction destroyed families and drained silver out of the Chinese economy. Chinese officials tried to stop it. A commissioner named Lin Zhezhu seized and destroyed large amounts of opium in 1839. Problem solved? Not quite. Britain responded with war. China lost the First Opium War. It was forced to sign treaties that gave Britain trade privileges and territory. Hong Kong was handed over. More ports were open to foreign control. Later wars brought even harsher terms. Foreign troops entered Beijing. Cultural treasures were looted and burned. Other powers followed Britain. France, Germany, Russia, Japan, and even the United States demanded their own concessions. China was divided into spheres of influence. Foreign citizens inside China often didn't have to follow Chinese law. Ports were controlled by outsiders. Railways and mines were influenced by foreign interests. And from China's point of view, this wasn't trade. It was humiliation. This period, from 1839 to 1949, is known in Chinese history as the Century of Humiliation. It's not a forgotten chapter. It's taught in schools. It's shown in museums. It's part of modern Chinese identity. And for generations, China had believed it was the center of civilization. Suddenly, it was treated as weak and backward. That shock changed everything. When the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, China fell into chaos. Warlords fought for power. Japan invaded in the 1930s and committed brutal atrocities. World War II brought more destruction. And finally, in 1949, the Communist Party took control. Mao Zedong declared that the Chinese people had stood up. From that moment, the new government built its legitimacy around one promise: never again. Never again would foreign powers dictate terms. Never again would weakness invite invasion. But the relationship with the West didn't improve. During the Cold War, China and the United States were on opposite sides. They fought indirectly in Korea. Over 180,000 Chinese soldiers died in that war. China saw American troops near its borders and felt threatened. For more than 20 years, China didn't hold its seat at the United Nations. Taiwan represented China instead. The United States supported Taiwan militarily, and from Beijing's perspective, this felt like another refusal to accept China's sovereignty. Later on, China and the United States improved relations in the 1970s. Trade increased. Western companies invested in China. Factories grew. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and for a while, it seemed like cooperation was working. China followed global trade rules. Western consumers brought Chinese goods. Companies made profit. China lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But trust was always fragile. As China's economy grew larger, Western governments began to worry. Factories in Europe and America closed. Manufacturing jobs moved to China. Some accused China of unfair trade practices. Others accused it of copying technology. From the Western point of view, it looked like China was using the system without fully following its spirit. And from China's point of view, it looked completely different. China believed it had finally learned how the modern world worked. It had studied Western industry, built its own factories, and competed successfully. But when Chinese technology companies like Huawei and ZTE expanded globally, they faced bans and restrictions. China saw a pattern. When it produced cheap goods, it was welcomed. When it moved into high-tech competition, it was treated as a threat. Then, there was the South China Sea. China claims islands and waters in the region. The United States says it's protecting freedom of navigation. American warships patrol nearby waters. China sees military bases in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. Both sides believe they're acting defensively. There was also a movement that deeply affected Chinese public opinion. In 1999, during NATO's bombing campaign in Yugoslavia, a US missile struck the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. 3 Chinese journalists were killed. The United States said it was an accident caused by outdated maps, but many in China didn't believe it. The embassy was clearly marked. Embassies are protected under international law, and for many Chinese citizens, this incident confirmed a long-standing suspicion that Western powers follow rules when convenient and ignore them when necessary. protests broke out in China, anger spread, and the people remembered. Today, Western countries criticize China on issues like human rights, internet censorship, and political freedoms. China responds by pointing to Western military interventions in Iraq and Libya. China argues that Western countries speak about democracy and law, but sometimes use force without United Nations approval. The West argues that China restricts freedoms and challenges international norms. Each side sees hypocrisy in the other. Neither side is likely to change its system for the other, which makes trust even harder. Economic competition has also intensified. Trade wars have led to tariffs. Technology exports are restricted. There are debates about supply chains and dependence. Western governments want to reduce reliance on Chinese manufacturing. China wants to reduce reliance on Western technology. Both sides fear vulnerability. When Western leaders talk about a rules-based international order, they often mean a system built after World War II with institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and NATO. Instead, China hears a system built when it was weak. It remembers that those same powers once forced unequal treaties and demanded extraterritorial rights. Even if today's leaders weren't alive during those events, the memory remains powerful. To many Western citizens, the Opium Wars feel distant. To many Chinese citizens, they feel personal. That difference in memory creates misunderstanding. China's leaders often speak about national rejuvenation. This means restoring dignity and strength, being treated as an equal. They want autonomy over their country. The West often views China's actions as assertive or aggressive, which China views as protective. Both sides interpret the same event very differently. For example, when China tightens control over Hong Kong, it says it's defending sovereignty. Western governments say it's limiting freedom. When the United States strengthens alliances in Asia, it says it's supporting partners. China says it's encirclement. When Western media reports on human rights issues, China says it's interference. The cycle feeds itself. Distrust builds slowly. It also deepens slowly. But can it be repaired? Trust requires vulnerability. It requires believing the other side will not take advantage of weakness. China's history teaches that weakness invites pressure. Western history teaches that unchecked power can be dangerous. Both lessons are powerful. Today, China and the West are deeply connected, trading trillions of dollars in goods. Students study abroad. Companies operate across borders. Climate change requires cooperation. Pandemics require shared research. But at the same time, the competition is real. Military budgets are rising. Alliances are strengthening. New technologies are guarded closely. Words like strategic rivalry are used more often. The relationship isn't simple. It's shaped by history, memory, competition, and fear. China doesn't forget the past, and the West doesn't always remember it in the same way. When two sides carry different memories of the same events, they speak past each other. That's how China and the West ended up here. Not because they were destined to hate each other, not because conflict is inevitable, but because history left scars on one side and blind spots on the other. Understanding that doesn't solve the problem, and until both sides recognize how deeply the past shapes the present, their relationship will remain tense and complicated. Thank you for watching.